If you ever go on the internet, you would know that Kingdom Hearts is a franchise that has a massive following. You could argue that recently it was thanks to Sora and Smash Bros., but a lot of people are fans of this franchise and look very fondly of the series. In 2019, I would play Kingdom Hearts 3 as my first Kingdom Hearts game. Yes, I know I'm not supposed to be playing that game first, but it was very cheap when I first got it. And I know for a fact that this one psychopath in high school would look up this cutscene of this one character and would lose his shit. It's funny. I played it myself and surprisingly beat it, which is uncommon for me at the time to do such things. I was pretty much move on from my life at that point and never really thought much of it. Until people can't stop talking about this piece of media like it's the best thing that ever happened to them. Which is true, it has a deep and complicated story that spans the whole series. If I were to play the older Kingdom Hearts games, I would need to play all the way back to the first game. Later in Christmas 2020, I get the collection that contains the first several games. 2 mainline games, 2 spin-offs, and cutscene movies of games that the developers don't have time to make. Before I knew it, I would start off with Kingdom Hearts 1. The idea of Kingdom Hearts was seen as a weird thing. How can you make an action-adventure game, like in Final Fantasy, with Disney characters? Squaresoft, now going by Square Enix, figured that out and thus created a wonderful world and characters and system that created the game, with its premise and fun gameplay, and is the reason the series is Square Enix's best-selling franchise. Regardless of what you think about the games themselves, they are high-quality action games that use the Keyblade to make wonderful combos. This was the game that started it all, and when I say this game fundamentally ruined my enjoyment of the series, I'm not exaggerating. I will give it credit for its story, graphics, and music, as that's all high-level work that really convey the feelings of Disney and has its own unique style to call its own, which holds pretty well despite being a 2002 PlayStation 2 game. What gets under my skin is the gameplay. It's an action game in 2002, so saying it's awful with modern standards is completely unfair. But out of all the games in the franchise I played, it was the only game that has some of the worst combat that makes it feel uncomfortable. It also has one of the worst boss fights I have ever witnessed that resulted in a mental breakdown like no other. I couldn't take this game as much anymore, and I was close to beating it, but with the way everything is set up, make it feel outdated. People will say it's my bad because I have a skill issue, but not everyone has the same skill level when it comes to games, and I played it on beginner's mode too. That's how bad it was. So I'm going to explain in detail about the mental health problems that this game has caused for me. Kingdom Hearts is my worst nightmare. The overall concept of this game is you'll be going to worlds based off Disney films such as Alice in Wonderland, The Little Mermaid, and The Nightmare Before Christmas, which if this game was made today, it would have been seen as an afterthought. This is an action RPG that would have some of the most janky combat I have ever witnessed. Movement feels disfigured, attacks feel like broken glass, and your party members just exist because they have to. You're mostly going to have Donald and Goofy in your party. In some worlds, you can opt them out for a specific character such as Aladdin or Tarzan. You'll use this Keyblade, which looks like a Nintendo GameCube accessory that can be upgraded to do more powerful actions and get more powerful. A game in 2002 to do such combat is completely innovative. Most people would take this for granted, but this was really ahead of its time. However, execution of it feels less than ideal because this genre hasn't really been developed as much, so I would say I understand the clunkiness of this. Outside of combat, you have these worlds that feel somewhat open and the game doesn't tell you where to go. Again, this is a game from 2002, so it makes sense, but at least make it more linear. And what's even worse is in areas such as deep jungle, the vines are some of the worst things to come out of this game. It's not responsive and it has too much shit. When you fall, you have to do it over again. This, out of the overall combat, makes it super distracting and is the reason why some people left the game because it's kind of mandatory. There's also smaller stuff that I feel are completely unnecessary, such as these ship missions that do not add anything and are just a device to go to world. And finally, I want to touch on the boss fights because they're the reason this game was one of the worst games I have ever witnessed. I want to remind people that this game was made for kids with its whimsical Disney look, and I get challenges normal and helps build adversity. But what they did here is some of the most broken boss fights that, if not careful, you're going to lose. The first one to kill me is Ursula. It's been a few years to really know what the boss is like, but a lot of shit will drain your health, and it's also in water, which makes it more complicated to handle the boss. People would also have problems with the fight against Ansem Riku, and that's fair, but I actually find it much easier than most bosses. In the original Kingdom Hearts, you can't skip the cutscenes, so that means you have to watch them over and over again. In Final Mix, they fixed the issue, but that still doesn't fix the balancing of the boss. Final Mix was the version I played with, by the way. When I get to the final few areas, it was a total disaster in terms of the total shit you have to deal with, in terms of the mentally unstable enemies, and then we get to fight the final battles with Ansem. The first fight wasn't the worst thing in the world, and then you have to fight this big guy again, that just adds filler by the way, and then this happens.
Heal! Take this!
This moment destroyed me in a way I couldn't recover from for a long time, and has a lasting impact on my mental health. And I did try multiple times, but was unsuccessful at doing so successfully. A few months later, I decided to go back again and finally did it, and move on to this giant ship boss. After dying multiple times, I gave up again because I knew I had to fight that Ansem again, and it's going to be a long and exhausting process that has too many phases for what's essentially a piece of shit. The final boss fights are the reason I gave up on this game, and this Ansem fight I couldn't recover from for many years. I want to discuss why it's important to play this game, because if you're going to play this franchise, then this needs to be known. Every game needs to be played in order if you wish to understand the overall story that the game wants to tell, along with the added details they're trying to push into the series. What they did is some of the worst ways to make your series unappealing to several people. If Kingdom Hearts Final Mix was just a separate game you can get on the PlayStation Store, then maybe I wouldn't have touched the rest of the series and move on. But unfortunately, it's part of multiple collections, and like I mentioned, the presentation of this game along with the music and memorable narrative help the players get engaged with the series. The gameplay is the worst the series has ever been, and people will say Chain of Memories was harder, and yes, the game has a lot of fuck you boss fights, but it was much more fair than what the original does. I personally have a bone to pick with this game, and my opinion will not matter. I know a ton of people who grew up with this game, and many loved it, and with good reason, and that's totally fair and valid. This alone is why the series is still successful, because it was effective in its overall design, with what was given on the PlayStation 2. If this was a PlayStation 5 game, then it would have been much more fair to the people who are looking to play the series. I know Square has no interest in remaking this game and think that Final Mix is good enough. I also know more Kingdom Hearts projects are in the works, with the 4th game and multiple stupid mobile game plot points that are going to matter. I stopped playing the franchise after the 3rd game, DLC not included. But one thing I did notice from the franchise is the fact they continue to improve the overall experience as time progresses, and how much they not only emphasize what made the first game special, but made gameplay feel much more polished and insane. The 2nd game specifically is the game of the franchise, and I consider it an overall excellent experience, and it continues with side games such as Birth by Sleep and Dream Drop Distance. I did replay 3 as well, and it's a good, but it's not great. Plus, understanding the story made it much better. But the first game continues to linger in my mind as the world continues to move on. The series as a whole needs to end and reboot itself, and Kingdom Hearts 1 is a game I do not want to recommend to anyone because of the pure mental issues I encountered when playing this game. For me, this game destroyed my interest with the series, and I hate Kingdom Hearts 1, and it's my life.